There is a specific kind of pain that doesn't scream. It doesn't break dishes. It doesn't send long paragraphs at 2 a.m. It doesn't beg to be chosen. It just sits there, in the silence after someone who once felt so close becomes unreachable. In the pause between your message and their cold, delayed reply. In the confusion of feeling their warmth one day and their distance the next. And if you've ever been caught in the gravity of an avoidant person, you know this pain too well. It makes you question everything. What changed? Did they stop caring? Did you ask for too much? Did your love become too heavy in their hands? And the most brutal part is this. While you are replaying every word, every glance, every shift in tone, trying to decode what happened, they often look fine. That is the illusion that breaks people. Because from the outside, avoidance can seem untouched. Calm, detached, unbothered, as if what happened between you barely left a mark, as if you were the only one who lost sleep. The only one who felt their chest tighten at the memory. The only one who kept checking your phone, hoping for a sign that it meant something to them too. But what avoidants do when nobody is watching tells a very different story. And if you understand that story, really understand it, something inside you begins to shift. Not because it makes their behavior okay, not because it means you should wait, but because it frees you from the lie that their distance means your insignificance. It doesn't. In fact, one of the hardest truths to accept is that avoidant people often pull away not when they feel nothing, but when they feel too much. That truth is not romantic. It is not an excuse. It is a wound, because when someone feels overwhelmed by closeness, your sincerity becomes pressure. Your consistency becomes exposure. Your love becomes a mirror, and some people would rather lose you than face what they see in themselves reflected back. So they withdraw, they go quiet, they delay, they numb, they distract. They disappear into work, into habits, into routines, into other people, into the illusion of independence. And if you don't understand the psychology of it, you will make their retreat mean something devastating about you. But their nervous system has its own language. Avoidant attachment is not just a mindset. It lives in the body, in the amygdala that reads intimacy as danger, in the cortisol spike that floods the system when emotional demands feel too close, too fast, too exposing, in the dopamine loops that crave connection until connection becomes real. Because fantasy is safe, longing is safe, distance is safe, but actual emotional intimacy, actual dependence, actual vulnerability, that can feel like a threat to a person whose system learned long ago that closeness costs too much. So when they care, they don't always melt. Sometimes they freeze. When they feel attached, they don't always move closer. Sometimes they detach to survive the feeling. This is why the avoidant pattern is so confusing. They can miss you and ignore you. Want you and resent you. Think about you constantly and still act like none of it matters. Not because they are always manipulative, not because every avoidant is calculating, but because fragmentation lives inside them. One part reaches, another part recoils. One part wants the comfort of being known, another part panics at being needed. And when nobody is watching, that split becomes visible, because silence is not empty to an avoidant. Silence is where the whole war happens. While you may imagine them moving on effortlessly, what often happens in private is much stranger, much sadder, and much more human. They keep themselves busy because stillness is dangerous. They tell themselves they needed space, that this is better, that emotions were getting messy, that they were right to pull away. But then something small breaks through. A song, a street, a certain hour of night, the memory of your voice when you were soft with them, the way you looked at them without armor. And for a moment the wall slips. That is when the ache comes in. Not always as grief. Avoidants rarely let it arrive that cleanly. Sometimes it shows up as agitation, restlessness, a sudden need to scroll, to work, to drink, to flirt, to disappear into noise. Sometimes it's irritation for no obvious reason. Sometimes it's a heavy emptiness they cannot name. Sometimes it's a sharp pulse of missing you that they shut down before it fully forms. Because that is what people do when they were trained to mistrust dependency. They do not process longing the way open-hearted people do. They interrupt it. They outpace it. They sedate it before it reaches language. But suppression is not the same as absence. This is what so many people get wrong. They think if an avoidant doesn't express, they don't feel. If they don't reach out, they don't care. If they look composed, they must be over it. No, A silenced emotion is still an emotion. A buried bond is still a bond. The body keeps records the mouth never speaks. And when nobody is watching, avoidants often revisit what they act like they've left behind. They check your social media and pretend it means nothing. They notice your absence in places where your presence used to soothe them, even if they never admitted it did. They remember conversations they acted indifferent during. They rehearse messages they never send. They feel the sting of your withdrawal more deeply than they expected, because somewhere inside them, they believed you would remain available no matter how distant they became. That is one of the brutal truths no one says clearly enough. As long as you chase, explain, reassure, overextend, and emotionally overfunction, the avoidant gets to remain in control of the distance. They don't have to confront loss, they only have to manage closeness. And closeness is what scares them most. But when you go still, really still, something changes, not performative silence. Not silence used as bait, not a cold game designed to trigger panic. Real silence, the kind that comes from self-respect. The kind that says, I will not keep reaching into a closed fist. The kind that says, I can love what you are and still refuse to abandon myself inside it. That silence does something profound. Because for the first time, the avoidant is no longer regulating the relationship by pulling away and then finding you still there. For the first time, their nervous system loses its familiar pattern. The background comfort of your availability disappears, and that is often when the emotions they evaded begin to surface. Not immediately, not always dramatically, but gradually, like a room becoming colder after the heat shuts off. They notice you are no longer there to soften the emptiness, no longer there to absorb the inconsistency, no longer there to translate their silence into reasons that protect them from guilt. And guilt does arrive, not always in the noble way people fantasize about. Not as some cinematic collapse where they suddenly realize your worth with tears in their eyes. It's quieter than that, more disturbing, more intimate. It's the late-night thought they can't outrun. Maybe I lost someone who truly saw me. It's the discomfort of being with someone new who does not touch them in the same emotional place. It's the strange irritation they feel when they see you becoming okay without them. It's the realization that your absence is not relief, it's consequence. And consequence is what begins to crack avoidance. Imagine them alone at night, phone in hand, no message from you. No emotional supply to reassure them that they still matter, still have access, still hold your attention. At first, they may feel control, space, even superiority. This is familiar, this is safer. But then the mind starts wandering into the places they work so hard to avoid. What are you doing? Are you moving on? Are you talking to someone else the way you used to talk to them? Did they miscalculate? Did they mistake your devotion for permanence? This is where the power dynamic starts to flip, not because you manipulated it, because you stopped interrupting their experience. You stopped protecting them from the emotional weight of their own choices. And once that happens, the avoidant often begins to do the very thing they made you do for so long. They think, they wonder. They check, they reread, they imagine, they miss. Sometimes they become nostalgic. Suddenly they remember your gentleness, your humor, the steadiness they once treated like background noise. Suddenly the intimacy that overwhelmed them becomes beautiful in retrospect, because distance allows them to romanticize what closeness once threatened. Sometimes they reach out indirectly. A casual message, a reaction to your story, a vague just checking in. A breadcrumb wrapped in emotional ambiguity, not because they are healed, not because they suddenly know how to love, but because the loss has become louder than the closeness once was. And this is the moment that traps so many people. Because when the avoidant returns, even slightly, your old hope can wake up like it never slept. You start thinking this is it. They finally understand. They finally miss me. They finally see my worth. Maybe they do. But missing you is not the same as being able to hold you well. That distinction can save your life. Because avoidants often feel deepest when they risk losing access, but feeling deeply is still not the same as being emotionally available. Pain can make them reach. Loneliness can make them circle back. Ego injury can make them seek reassurance. But unless they have actually confronted the pattern inside themselves, unless they have learned how to stay present when intimacy activates fear, they will return with the same nervous system that left. and an unexamined nervous system always repeats what is familiar. That is why the real shift in this story cannot be about getting them back. It has to become about finally seeing clearly. Seeing that their detachment was never proof that you were forgettable. Seeing that their silence was not always indifference, but overload. Seeing that your urge to explain yourself, to rescue the connection, to prove your value, only kept you trapped in a role where your worth depended on someone else's capacity. And that is too small a life for you, because the truth is, people with avoidant patterns often do hurt in private. They do care in ways they cannot sustain. They do miss what they pushed away. They do replay moments, imagine reconnection, and feel the slow sting of your absence. But if you build your healing around what they might secretly feel when nobody is watching, you will remain emotionally chained to someone who can only love you in fragments. Fragments are not home. You cannot build peace inside mixed signals. You cannot build safety inside emotional rationing. You cannot build self-worth from waiting to be fully chosen by someone who only reaches when loss finally pierces their defenses. And this is where the pattern must break, not with revenge. Not with proving, not with becoming colder than they are, but with refusal. A sacred refusal to keep translating their confusion into your responsibility. A sacred refusal to call inconsistency depth. A sacred refusal to confuse being missed with being cherished properly. Because yes, when nobody is watching, avoidants often feel more than they let on. More longing, more fear, more memory. More regret, more internal conflict. But your job is not to become the interpreter of another person's buried emotional life while your own needs starve in plain sight. Your job is to come back to yourself, to notice how much of your energy has gone into reading silences instead of listening to your own body, to notice how often you called anxiety intuition, to notice how many times you settled for potential because you were addicted to the emotional intensity of almost being chosen. That intensity is not love. It is activation. Your nervous system can confuse the two, especially if inconsistency feels familiar. The dopamine of intermittent attention can make longing feel profound. The crash after connection can make chemistry feel sacred. The uncertainty can make the bond feel fated. But being physiologically hooked is not the same as being emotionally safe. And healing begins when you stop worshiping what wounds you. When you stop measuring your worth by how deeply someone damaged still thinks about you in the dark. When you stop asking, "Do they miss me?" and start asking, "Why did I have to disappear for them to feel me?" That question changes everything. Because someone who can only access your value through your absence is not ready for the gift of your presence. Read that again in your bones. Someone who needs to lose you to feel you is not capable right now of loving you in the way your heart needs. Maybe one day they will face themselves. Maybe one day they will soften. Maybe one day they will learn that intimacy is not captivity, that dependence is not weakness, that closeness does not erase identity. Maybe, but your life cannot be built on maybe. Your power returns the moment you stop orbiting the hidden feelings of someone who could not meet you in the open. Your power returns when their silence stops being a mystery and starts becoming information. Your power returns when you realize that your tenderness was never the problem. Your depth was never the burden. Your needs were never too much for the right nervous system, the right heart, the right level of emotional maturity. You were not too much. You were too real for someone surviving by numbness. And that should not make you smaller. It should make you wiser. So if you are sitting in the aftermath of an avoidant connection, wondering what they do when nobody is watching, here is the answer that matters most. Sometimes they miss you. Sometimes they obsess more than you would believe. Sometimes they feel the full weight of what they lost only after the distance becomes irreversible. Sometimes they break in places no one sees. But that is not your destination. Your destination is the part of you that no longer needs hidden longing as proof of love. The part of you that no longer finds power in being unforgettable to emotionally unavailable people. The part of you that stops trying to be the exception to someone else's unhealed pattern. The part of you that chooses peace over intensity, consistency over chemistry, truth over fantasy, self-respect over emotional crumbs. That version of you is dangerous in the most beautiful way. Because once you become unavailable to confusion, everything changes. You stop chasing closure from closed people. You stop negotiating with silence. You stop performing emotional labor for those who benefit from your patience but cannot return your depth. And suddenly, the old dynamic dies, not because they changed, because you did. Because now, whether they watch your story in silence, type and delete messages, stalk your page, miss your warmth, dream about your voice, or feel regret so late it finally chokes them, none of it has the power it used to have. Because your worth is no longer waiting in their nervous system to be recognized. It lives in you, steady, untouchable, self-held, and that is the final shift. Not I hope they realize what they lost, but I realize what I was giving to someone who could not hold it, not maybe if I stay quiet long enough. They'll come back different, but I am done shrinking myself into someone else's emotional limitations. Not was I enough, but I was always enough. They were just at war with what closeness asked of them. Let them fight that battle without using your heart as the battlefield. Let them sit with the echoes. Let them meet the silence they created. Let them feel in the privacy of their own guarded world whatever finally rises when you are no longer there to soften it. And you keep walking, not bitter, not closed, not hardened into someone unrecognizable to yourself. Just clear that your love is sacred, clear that your nervous system deserves peace. Clear that being deeply felt in private is not the same as being deeply loved in reality. Clear that the right connection will not require you to vanish in order to be valued. This is where you stop haunting someone else's inner world and start inhabiting your own life. This is where your silence stops being a plea and becomes a boundary. This is where your heartbreak stops being a prison and becomes an initiation. And this is where you become impossible to manipulate, not because you feel less, but because you finally know your feelings deserve a home that does not flinch when they arrive. That is power. Quiet power, clean power, the kind that does not chase, the kind that does not beg to be seen. The kind that knows, if someone can only love me from a distance, then they do not get access to me up close. And once you know that, truly know it, something unshakable is born. Not the need to be chosen, the decision to choose yourself.